record. And yeah, first off, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming here to listen to me talk about my favorite thing, coding. My name is Ege. I'm a second year or like rising thesis MFA Design and Technology student. I am seeing some familiar faces from the program. Hi all, but there are also some that I have not met at all before. So first off, if there are any of you who are coming into our program, like this is your first year of the MFA DT, or in any other way, like your first introduction to DT, welcome. So glad to have you all here, both in this workshop, in Telepresence, and in our whole next upcoming online semester. You're not alone, and we welcome you with love. And other than that, today, that love is going to come in the form of a whole bunch of CSS. This is CSS Power Hour. I already introduced myself. And today we're going to be talking about CSS, which is one of the key technologies, one of the three key technologies that go into making the front end of websites, or just like websites in general. The other two, as you can see, are HTML and JavaScript. And within this trio, the sort of role of CSS is to create the presentation of a website. That sort of means like setting the layout of different objects in a website, their sizes, their colors, their typography, their animations, and this thing called responsive design, which is sort of unique to websites in that websites are designed to be looked at through many different screens with many different sizes, widths, heights, aspect ratios. So some work through CSS also goes into making the website presentable across many different screens, none of which usually share the same properties. So I did skip this part behind. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. What that means, you don't really need to know, honestly, but it's basically, the name is very literal. It's like a waterfall of styles, basically, but we'll get to that more visually in a little bit. CSS is a good thing to know if you're interested in, designing or coding any of these things that are related to a website. If you're not, but you're still interested in doing web things, it's also a very useful thing to know, even if you're coding or not. If you're an interface designer, a UX designer, it's good to know what CSS does, because that's your designs in like your mockups and wireframes are all going to be brought to life through CSS. So it's good to know what it can and can't do and how it can do things. It's also a good thing to know if you're interested in computer graphics in any way that is not related to websites, because a lot of the core principles of computer graphics also exist in CSS. And we'll get to those as well in a little bit. So, I mean, why am I focusing on CSS in this workshop? Well, aside from all of the cool things that I counted, which I mean, those are great things for me, because that's my bias. I'm a graphic designer turned web designer, so learning CSS has been a great thing for me. But this workshop specifically, I decided to make because I found over the years, and especially coming to this program, that not a lot of people share my love of CSS. CSS for me, whenever I have to make a website, has been sort of the favorite part, like my favorite part in making the whole process. And people I've talked to here and people I've tutored in CSS usually come with me with a lot of frustrations. They don't seem to be able to get things looking the way they want to, or make their designs translate in a satisfactory way to their CSS. And so after a year of basically looking at how people learn things about CSS and what kind of questions they came with, I decided, hey, like, maybe I can just bundle all the knowledge I have and give it to you guys in that way. So, and what will we be doing in this workshop? So first of all, I'll talk a little bit about how I see CSS, especially from my perspective of a graphic designer and UI UX designer turned web developer, how I see CSS, and then take that sort of philosophy into the very basics of it. So this is going to be a all skill levels workshop, but we're going to be starting from the very beginning of things. And but it's still not going to be a complete, like, absolute beginners, your first step to CSS sort of workshop, because I will be taking basic concepts, but I will be mixing them together with what could be considered more advanced, and actually show you, like, oh, like the gap of knowledge between these two levels of writing CSS is not that large at all. So it's just going to be a lot of small examples that we'll be doing this through. This is the last slide of this, and we're going to be jumping into a lot of live coding in a little bit. You can follow along if you want. I sadly didn't have the time to create a sort of example or practice projects folder, but if you would like, I can send the code that emerges out of this workshop to you after we're done. And finally, after showing you all of these basic concepts through live examples, we will actually bring them together in more like more concrete examples, like, oh, how do I vertically center an element on the screen? How do I make a hamburger menu that slides in and out? And we're gonna try to, even though other languages might be involved, we're gonna try to keep it completely to CSS as much as we can. And there are some things that are going to be missing because we just can't talk about everything, even though we have an hour and a half. But animations, transitions, and these two things called flexbox and grid will still be involved. I just won't be able to introduce you to them as deeply as I want to, because, well, those are their own workshops, honestly. So with all that said, let's begin with some of how to look at CSS. So far, I haven't really showed you any CSS, and I'm still not going to. First off, I'm actually gonna just go out of this tab and show you this Figma screen I have here, where I simply have a button. Why am I showing you this button? Well, to make a point. This here is a button designed in the Figma program called Figma. Figma is much like Photoshop and Illustrator. It's something I use a lot, so I didn't pull up an example in Photoshop or Illustrator just because there's a lot more going on in the screens there. But this is a button designed on Figma. We have designed this button using the interface of Figma, which is sort of spread out into these little different areas. We have our sort of rectangle creation button here that we use to create this rectangle. We have a text, text interface here that allows us to create text. And we also have this side area here that appears whenever we click on one of these elements that we created, that sort of allows us to set its different properties in ways. So we have a fill area here that allows us to change the color of this button. We have an effects area here where I have placed a drop shadow. So this area over here, we can adjust the properties of that drop shadow using setting these different numbers in these different fields. So I messed this one up just by changing two things. We similarly have a sort of hierarchy of objects here where we have a rectangle and this text over here, and dragging these and reordering these sort of switch up their hierarchies. So Um, I told you all of this because CSS also works in a very similar way, except that it is all done with code, or rather text. So this is the same button created with CSS. And instead of your different toolbar buttons or your different like fill sections or effect sections or your hierarchy, instead you have a bunch of code. But this bunch of code actually correlates really closely to the interface you were seeing, the visual interface you were seeing. We have a width setup here, a height setup here, which is present in this area. We're setting a background color much similarly to the fill area over here. We are setting the font size of the text inside of the button where it says click me. I didn't show that part, but when you click on the text, you have this text area like this. So instead of these sort of visual groupings with CSS, when you're setting up these different things, you are instead reliant on these sort of pairs where you set a property like a width and a number to it. And in all honesty, these are just two different ways of having your computer do the exact same thing. And that thing is to render, or rather like put up on the computer screen a visual object with a set color, like just a bundle of pixels that means something else. In both of these cases, you are not coding the actual granular, I will pick these pixels and paint them pink. I will take these pixels and form them into the shape of readable human text. You're not doing that actual thing. You're commanding your computer to do those things in the background through different interfaces. In CSS, that interface is text. So sort of seeing it like this, like that is sort of where, like, this is where my enjoyment of CSS comes from. So that's why I want to talk a lot about all of this. But there are differences between this Figma visual interface and the CSS visual interface, of course. And the major difference is actually the output. Here in Figma, we're creating like contextually, as we're drawing it, like I can say here, oh, I created a button here. But the actual output of Figma, when you click on a frame or like an object like this and click export, you export a static image, like a PNG or a JPEG. A static image here means that it's not animated, it does not move, it does not change colors, and more importantly, its width and height are fixed. No matter where you put it, when I export this 500 pixel by 500 pixel frame, it's going to come out as 500 pixel and 500 pixel image. In CSS, your output isn't an image, it's a website. And websites, most importantly, don't have fixed widths and heights. They are meant to be viewed through many different screens. And so it goes that the elements you create into this website also needs to be, well, designed towards non-fixed widths, fluid widths, or fluid heights. They need to be designed sort of more dynamically. They need to fit into a mobile screen as much as it fits into a desktop. And that's where the sort of complexity of CSS comes in. But it's important to know that complexity. And it's also sort of important to start learning CSS with that complexity, because that is where designing with CSS actually comes into effect. Otherwise, if I put in 400 pixels and 80 pixels here, like I would to like set the size of an element the way I would in a Figma file or an Illustrator or Photoshop file, then I'm gonna get a result that is similar to that, a static image. And that is where a lot of frustrations come in. So that's the sort of like rundown of basics I'm going to take you through. On each step, while we're looking into what sort of different things CSS has, we're going to be we're gonna always keep that sort of how can I make this element fluid? Does it need to be responsive to different screens or whatnot? We're going to be keeping that in mind, and we're going to be looking at different ways of consistently doing that with different elements and etc. All right, so with all of that, let's begin once again. Like, let's look at the screen once again, but let's take it a little bit more from scratch. This window I'm looking into right here, it's Visual Studio Code. So right now it's on a full screen, so I can't really show you the app bar. It's this guy over here. And these two files that I have here, which I'm previewing over here in a website preview, they are both inside of this project folder here, which I named Workshop. So if I click into here, I see that my index.html and style.css files are here. These are also visible when I click on this tab here and see my sort of project file. I'm talking about all of this because the first step of creating a web project is to create a folder for that project. You can't really have things affecting the website outside of this folder. It also gets very confusing when you start doing that. So whatever you're going to create inside of your website, it is a good idea to put them all in one folder. And before we get to live coding, I also just want to say really quickly, if you have any questions, just type them through chat. I will try to look at them in between these different steps and sections. Also, feel free to follow along, but I'm going to be rushing through things because we're going to be talking about a lot of things. Any other disclaimers I want to put up? Not really. Okay, so these two files here, sorry, before we get to writing more CSS, another thing I want to talk about is the CSS you're going to write. Even though we're going to be talking about only CSS, you can't really think about, oh, I'm just going to learn CSS and make things out of it. CSS is deeply connected to the HTML file that it's meant to style. So I have an HTML file here with a button element. And here in the CSS file, I am selecting button elements and giving them different styles. If I took this CSS file and supplanted it into another HTML file, it would probably not make much sense, or it wouldn't really look as good unless the styles you're writing are very generic and are like more geared towards being a sort of website theme that you can slap onto any website. But that's a whole other subject. The way we connect these files in our HTML is through this line of code over here, which is called a link tag. Oh, another thing is I'm assuming that people around here have some HTML like experience, at least like knowing that you guys know, what a tag is, or like some very basic CSS knowledge about, oh, like HTML tags are affected by like in CSS, we target HTML tags to give styles to them. So I'm assuming that knowledge, but if you didn't, well, this is me telling you that the way we use CSS is we connect it to an HTML file, like this link tag here. This rel style sheet part is obligatory. It's a keyword. You just put it in there, and then with this other part, href equals style.css, you pick which CSS file in your project folder, in this case style.css, you want to connect into your project. You can have multiple CSS files, like I have a fin.css here. You can link as many as you want, but you should know that whatever styles that are written inside the latter file are going to overwrite the ones in the former. Overwriting we'll get to in a little bit. Okay, cool. So with all that, let's actually start thinking about some, like, what this CSS file we're looking at is actually like. What are we looking at here? So I'm going to zoom this in a little bit just to show you the code a little bit more and delete everything. And I'm just going to write a CSS rule block. Well, yeah, a CSS block is what it's called. So a CSS block is basically comprised of 3 pieces. So let's write a CSS block here. And I'm just gonna write, well, I don't need to do that yet, actually. So the anatomy of a CSS block is, well, I'm gonna highlight that we have 3 parts to it. The first is this area. This part is called a selector. This is the part where we select elements in our HTML. Like this is where we decide which particular element we're going to apply any styles we write in the rest of the CSS rule to. The second part are these, well, curly brackets. These curly brackets sort of delineate the opening and closing of a CSS rule. Everything that is inside of these brackets are going to be applied to what the selector is. This second part, so the area inside of curly brackets, these we call declarations, a CSS declaration. So we declare in a line that the background of div elements shall be red. We declare that the height of the div elements shall be 60 pixels. We declare that the width of a div element is 400 pixels. So let me actually just put in a div element here so that we see, what it ends up looking like. And I need to refresh this. And yay, so that's a 400 pixel wide, 60 pixel tall, red backgrounded div that we created here. All we did in the HTML part of things was to start and finish a div tag. I'll just say hello here as well, just to be nice to you all. So this declaration too can be considered in 2 parts. The first is the left part of the declaration. This part where we define like, oh, what part of the div are we going to manipulate, is called a property. So a declaration is a property plus what? This part, and this part is called a value. Like this part is the value. So declarations are pairs, basically pairs of properties and values. And you bring enough properties and values together inside of selectors, and suddenly you have a CSS file going on. So before we sort of dive into shaping websites using these building blocks, I just want to sort of talk to you about what sort of properties we have, what sort of values we have, and what sort of selectors we have. So like just a rundown of the toolbox that we have. And for that, even though I'm not going to like pull it up and talk to you guys about it here, I want to guide you all to this website called Cssreference Io, because there are so many selectors and properties and different value types that like it's impossible to know them all. It's impossible to understand all of their uses and all of their different contextual uses. And this website both like just categorizes these different parts really well, and also shows you a lot of contextual examples, probably more than I will afford to here. But so let's take what these are step by step. let's start with selectors. So selectors, as I said, select different HTML elements. So let me bring this back to a split screen for you guys, actually. And in this case, like in this CSS rule that we've written, we select div elements and apply these styles to them, and there's only one div element here. So just putting up the keyword of a tag like this just applies. You can do this to any element inside of the body tags of your HTML, including the body. So if I instead applied this to body, we would have a sort of different look here where we have a full, fully red background, even though we're setting the height of body to 60 pixels. So that actually brings me to another point that I was not really sure whether I wanted to talk to you guys about or not. But let me just say, the sort of default no CSS HTML file you're looking at here, this does have default CSS styles applied to different elements that you're building. So we just saw one of those cases, which sort of look like things break, but they're actually not. They're just more CSS rules that we're not changing or fixing, that are laid in by default to any website you look at. And one of those is that the body is going to be treated as a full, like a full screen area, no matter what you do. So let's revert this back to div so that we're only selecting this friendly div element that we have here. And so just for posterity's sake, let's create 3 more of them. So I'm just gonna change what's written inside of them, all of them, and we have these 4 buddies here. So let's now, like, you might have also noticed that because whatever we write in this singular div selector applies to all div elements. This will still apply even though if one of these divs is contextually very different than the others. Let's say these are just messages, and the third div we're going to create, even though we're not going to like do that right now, we decided it to be a whole like subscription form, for instance. So here I can like create an input, give it a type text and like a submit button, maybe, just like that. And like, even if maybe I might want a different style for this div because it's going to be contextually very different. It's going to be a form, but because I selected div like this, well, and apply these styles in this way, it's going to still apply to this. So how do we, among many div elements, how can we select one of them or a few of them, like one or few of them at once, and like not apply those same styles to other divs? Well, one way we can do it is by giving them giving divs classes. So that's something we do in HTML. Inside of HTML, we already see a lot of these, like type text, type submit, or like rel style sheet, these sort of adjustments or like options that we can put into HTML files. These are called attributes. And one of the attributes that any HTML element can take is class. And well, classes, if you have never seen this being used before, are basically labels or tags we can give to elements, like custom tags. This third div is going to contain a form, so I might want to call it form container like this. And I might want to apply styles differently to it. So the way I would select a class instead of just all elements of this type would be to use a dot, and then write the class name next to it. So let's say we want a green background, and for now I'm just going to be using these horrible colors. I did warn you in the slides, do not expect aesthetic beauty from this workshop. It's just going to be coding and concepts. So in this case specifically now, we get the form container, and we're setting its background to be green. We can do other things. We can select something like font size. I don't know, like really stretch it out. And that didn't, what's happening here? Well, CSS is full of wonders. Let's not do that, but maybe let's adjust its height so that it's like 2 times as long as the other ones. So another way, I will keep this part fast, to select specific elements is your ID. So if I were to select, instead of doing instead of tagging my form container with a class, I can also do it with an ID. What that would change in our CSS would be to just replace this dot with a hashtag. And what's happening here? Gosh, are you guys seeing a typo that I'm putting up? Because this is not what we wanted at all. So this is why you practice, guys. Even though I did practice and everything went along the way I wanted it to so far, is it maybe because of this? Well, yeah, it is. I accidentally added a form here this time. So I will be talking about why that happened in a little bit. But basically, this is how you would select things with an ID. So this all so far is very basic knowledge. Let's talk about some other ways you can select elements with CSS. And let's talk about first why you might need different ways of selecting things with CSS. So with classes and IDs, and I forgot to talk about this, IDs, you can only have one of the same ID in every HTML page. So I create a form container here. If I set the ID of another element as form container, that might not give me errors here. It didn't change anything, but in loose, very like offshoot cases, it will completely break your code and you will not know why. So like the styles you apply will suddenly not start working or things like that. So just keep your ID use uniquely. If you need to add the same tag to many different elements, like the same sort of label to many different elements, use your class instead. So classes and using classes and IDs are definitely recommended, but in some cases, things will get so dynamic, or just like there will be, or you will suddenly, like in a larger project, find yourself using so many classes and IDs that it might start overwhelming you. Just like imagine, let's have a sort of what should we have? Well, let's have another form. Why don't we? Let's say we have a subscription form again, and I'm just gonna, subscription form, and let's have inside like a form tagline, and where we will say, subscribe to keep posted about our projects or something like that, and then an input, and we can give it a class of form email. Ooh, I forgot to close. Did I forget to close the div? No. Form email like this, which is gonna also have a type of email, etc. And let's also have a submit button. Like this. And well, if this is the only element in our design right now, if the subscription form is the only element in our website, this might start making a lot of sense. Oh yeah, like I'm naming this subscription form, and then I'm giving the H3 class a class, and I can just like target all of these separately. I can give my form tagline some style. I can give my form email some style, etc. But imagine you having 20 different things in your web page and you naming all of them different things like this. That will just get overwhelming with each of these little rules you create and each of these little exceptions, because their styles may be different. Or it's even worse if all of the styles are the same. If you're keeping all of your different buttons, if you're giving them all the same style, but you're styling them all using different classes, like this might be a form submit, another button might be like a, might have an ID of, I don't know, menu close, for instance. That will just get unruly as you write more and more CSS here. So some techniques to get over that. One thing you can do, and this is usually what I do, but I will be showing you that there are a lot of different ways to rectify this situation. One thing I do is I sort of treat my HTML structures as in this sort of way that we call separation of container and content. So this is a novel concept for people who might be getting in from UI design or graphic design, because usually when we create things, we create a text element, and like in this case, everything from the sort of if we look at the code that is like the CSS conversion that Figma does here, everything is sort of attached to this everything that comes from its position, so it's like left and top positions, or its width and height, and it's like font stuff and its color. All of them are compacted into this single text element. Using instead a container and content sort of form, where you have an element that its only where its only purpose is to contain elements contextually, like this form here, and to also set them within the larger layout of the page. Giving those classes and then removing classes or any other sort of indicator of identity with these elements can give you more of more flexibility. So instead of now here doing form container and form tagline and form email like this, you can use the parent selector. Sorry, not the parent selector, but the children selector, where you can sort of go, instead of form container here, it's going to be subscription form. So you can first select subscription form and then leave a space and then target the element, the child element you want to select inside of it. So going subscription form space H3 like this is gonna, well, only select H3s that are inside of subscription form. So I'm gonna give it another awful color. And do I have to, oh, it's a class. I'm very sorry, guys. I am sort of nervous. But okay, here we go. When I switch it back to ID, we have it here. This is terrible. The looks, I mean. But okay, I am spending a lot of time with this, so I'm just gonna rush along a little bit more. We have other things like we have comma selectors, where we sort of are able to apply the same thing to like the same styles to multiple elements at once, you might want to do this in a case where you have where you want to just set things for multiple elements at once. So we can have a situation like this where we have 5 different elements, and we might want to target all of them and just like change one thing about them or like 2 things about them sweepingly. So here we have these gaps between these 5 elements, right? I can select all of them using commas separated between them, and I can basically just, you know, give them all a margin of 0, which is gonna, well, yeah, squish them more together. So what else can we talk about with selectors? There are a lot of them. I'm gonna skip talking about the more complex ones, even though I really want to talk to you guys about it. But I am gonna sort of guide you towards, well, let me actually just find it over here, selectors. I'm gonna both guide you to developer, like the Mozilla Developer Network, which is the best web resource you might have, and the selector area, like the explanation of selectors right over here. So this here is actually a basic explanation, but as you can see, you have a lot of different things. I want to talk to you about combinators and pseudo classes, but I guess time flies when you're talking. So I do need to talk to you about other things. I need to talk to you about properties, for instance. So much like we have a multitude of selectors, we also have a multitude of properties. So far, we've used very basic ones, and I sort of did that on purpose, like your background, your height, your width, etc. Because there are 520 of these altogether, and they all sort of work in different ways. So I'm not going to like talk to you about, oh, like these are the properties you should know. They're going to emerge, and like, you know, you're going to, oh, sorry, I just saw your question here, Jens. You're going to have like, there's no way you will know all of them is basically what I'm trying to say. And this website, again, Cssreference Io, which I'm going to link over as well, not only does it very nicely categorize all of these different properties when you click into one of them, it also, like, you know, it shows you what it's related to, like flexbox, animations, backgrounds, etc. It also shows you all of the different sort of options it can take and what these look like. So that's a pretty good thing. But what I am going to talk to you right now for like another 15 minutes are values. So it's okay to not know all of the properties you may have, but it's really important to know what sort of values you have, because so far we've only been using very basic background red, that height like 60 pixels. We're using the most basic values in CSS, and like knowing what sort of values you can use is gonna elevate your game for sure. So let's talk about the types of values. We have a few of them, and this is by no means comprehensive. But I'm gonna pull up a few of them, and I'm just gonna do one thing over here, like create one div over here, and just put in, yeah, hello world, and we will just see that it's completely, like, it has no styles attached to it now. So the first sort of value type we have are our length values. So we've seen a few of these, like when we did with 200 pixels, height, 60 pixels like this. Let me also just put in a background here, just so that, you know, we can see how the width and height are affected. So these guys, your pixels are your first type of length value, pixels. Pixels, as you know, are the like little granular block pieces of your computer screen or any screen you have. Just to get very tangential. 1 pixel is usually 1/96th of an inch when it comes to web screens. So that means for more graphic design people, it's got a 90, like we have a 96 dpi view when we are using pixels. And pixels are, of course, like the most basic size value that we have. They are also not always the most useful one that we have, which I can demonstrate in that, like, pixels are static values. So if you set an element to 1,000 pixels, it's going to stay 1,000 pixels. This might look good on a a wide desktop screen, but if you squish it back into a mobile, it's still going to stay 1,000 pixels. This might still look good. Oh yeah, like, hello world. I have it here on the left. I have a sort of like stretching thing, but if you scroll right, oh no, this still goes on. This will absolutely frustrate your mobile viewers, that like they will try to scroll down, they will accidentally scroll to the side. What is happening? They'll get lost, etc. That's horrible. So pixels use in moderation. We would use pixels in 2 ways. The first way would be for very small elements. And the second one we will get to in a little bit. So another size value we may have is percentages. So if percentages here, percentages are basically relative sizes. So if I say 100%, I'm asking, of course, like 100% of what? So let me just write this down. Percentages are relative to the element that is containing the element that you're setting up. So here we're giving width 100% to this div here. That means it's going to take on 100% of the width of its containing element like this. There are some gaps because, once again, there are some default styles that we haven't changed, like a margin on body. So when I remove that, it's going to take up exactly 100% of the width of its element, no matter what we do. So a few nuances. When usually percentage values is going to take up, like, it is going to be relative to the width of the element, except in cases where we write percentage values for the height. So a height of 35% is going to be, oh, that's interesting. Is it actually? Oh, okay. So we also, because I said relative to the parent, the body height right now is not, like, it's only as high as this area. So I'm gonna give it a larger piece here. Let's do it like 500 pixels. And now it's gonna like take up 500, like if the height of the body is 500 pixels, this is this div, which is a child of this body element, is going to take up 100 pixels, 100% of that size. If we give it 50%, it's going to take up 50% of it. Let me also put in a ugly background here so you can see how it's not taking as much space. This is also, yeah, a very web brutalist right now. But let's move on. So let me just like demonstrate this sort of parent-child relationship a little bit more. I'm going to put in a div here, and then I'm going to put in a paragraph element here. I'm a paragraph. And now we can sort of see more. So let me get rid of a few of these. Let me give this height, like a 600 pixel height like this, and then also target div P, so all paragraphs that belong to divs. And I can give it like well, let's give it another background like that, see that works, and then give it a height of 50%, for instance. And now we can see it's taking up exactly half, or 30%. If I give it a width of 30%, it's going to take up only 30%. And as we sort of, adapt it, it's going to start changing. So here's now how to use these two things, like the percentages and pixel values in tandem. The best way I found to use them is to sort of give adaptive base widths to elements, like 100% width for this div over here, as we are seeing here. And then when I want them to stop scaling, so this is just going to go on no matter how much I stretch it, right? And then if I want to have it stop using the max width property at any point, then I can give it like a solid pixel value. So it's gonna, well, let's do it 600. It's gonna be, so with this case, with these two rules here, it's gonna stretch out for a while, and then once the whole like container hits 600 pixels, it's just gonna stop. So percentages, just to like go through them, are relative values. 1% is 1% of the parent parent elements width or height. So there we are with that. Another important length value to know, and there are a lot of them, but we're just gonna touch on two others, is, well, the first is the VW. So let's, instead of 100% here, let's do VW and see what that does. Let's also, it changes nothing. And that is because VW, well, is very much like percentages. It's actually exactly like that. VW stands for viewport width. And one VW is 1% of the browser width. So the difference between a percentage and a VW then is that the percentage is going to take up the width of the percentage is going to be calculated based on width of the parent element, whereas VW is going to do it through the entire window at large. So to demonstrate it more clearly, I can give, instead of, so let me bring some code back. So right now in this case, our div is going to have a width of 100%, and it's going to stop at 600 pixels. So this is like the old way that it looks like. So now, instead of giving the paragraph that we have in cyan here, instead of giving it a 30% width or like a 50% width, I'm going to give it a 50 viewport width. So everything looks okay here, right? So like it's taking up half of the space it's given, but let's see what happens when I start stretching out more and more. So obviously this paragraph is no longer taking up half of the width of its container. It's taking up half of the width of the larger, like the screen at large. So VW, viewport width, that's what it does. Let me actually carry that out over here. The height counterpart of VW is VH. So I can put in like 50 VH here. And we're basically gonna, yeah, so I'm just gonna write the same here as well. Viewport height, 1 VH equals 1% of browser height. So that's one thing. One last thing that I want to talk about here is the last size value is ems. So you might have also seen this if you checked out some CSS examples before. Ems or rems, I'm not, so you might have like seen them, how do I, oh, sorry. How do I like sort of get this in a concise way? Well, you might have seen them used for font sizes like this 1em or 1rem or like 2.5 rem. And I'm just gonna tell you what they are really quickly. Ems and rems, they both stand for, so 1em and 1rem is equal to 16 pixels. And we use these as a sort of, instead of just giving it a font size of 16 pixels, we give it as 1M, because the M value is sort of connected to the base font size of not only the website but also the browser. So what that means is M's are recommended to be used because they provide more accessibility. Think about your mom or your parents who need like large, who need to zoom in the font size, or like increase the font size on their phones, because, well, mine is, at least, like, she needs reading glasses now to use her phone. So to help out people who need larger text, usually you will need to use M because it's directly connected to that system, whereas just setting font sizes, especially as pixels, is not going to have your CSS interact in that way at all. I realized that I talk much slower than I expected, and like from when I rehearsed. We do have a lot more to talk about, but I guess we can keep going with color values. And is anyone tired? Is this like too much right now? I can also just stop and take some more specific questions and answers you might have about CSS. All right, Giannis here is up to go on. Does anyone else have any thoughts on how to use our last half hour? All right, I'm gonna go. What's my favorite CSS property? Gosh, grid template columns and grid template rows, which are just like they're connected to different, more advanced CSS property that I am looking forward to making a whole like workshop about. But I want to just go through CSS basics with people first before doing anything like that. But I'll show you guys the CSS tricks complete guide to grid. CSS grid is just the best way to make grids work. So can you repeat M and rem? Yes, and I'll do it in a bit of a better way, maybe without all of this like sick brutalist designs going on here. So M's and rems are two different like alternative size values, length values to pixels. The basic of it is 1M and 1 rem by default are equal to 16 pixels. So 2M is going to be equal to 32 pixels. 3.5 is going to be equal to so on. The reason why we would use M's and rems instead of pixels, grid template columns and grid template rows. So let me actually send this guide over to you guys. It's gonna, if you all want to do good layouts in the web, this is gonna probably change your life. So those two properties allow you to basically, as shown sort of in an abstract way in this chart here, they allow you to basically shape any sort of container element into a grid with columns and rows that you can fit your elements into in very dynamic ways. So that all is pretty cool. Back to M's and rems though. So the reason why we use M's and rems instead of pixels to delineate static values like 16 pixels, 32 pixels, and is because they are connected to this sort of concept of a base font size in your computers and in your browsers. And that base font size is basically set, by default, it's going to be 16 pixels. But other devices, like, where you might go like this computer here has it, your iPhones have it, like you can set the base font size of your device to something larger or smaller based on, if you're having trouble reading smaller text, you might want to increase it. And Ms and Rems basically are set adaptively to that. So even though by default you might be designing for like 16 pixels here, if someone sets it to 32 pixels, all of your font sizes are gonna like scale up adaptively if you use 1M and 1Rem. So I found out recently, I've been using M and Rem for any static value until like a month ago. I found out that they're only really useful for this specific purpose, for fonts and typography. So yeah. Do you guys want to keep doing Q&As, or should I just um, blurt out information on you guys? So how do we determine the base font size? So let me show you. You would go to System Preferences, and Accessibility, I think, is where it's supposed to be. And is it Display? Is it Zoom? It's somewhere around here. Probably. But like you would do it, you would determine the base font size of your computer over your own like you know, settings, or you might want to do it through Chrome settings, for instance. Let me see if I can find that there. Privacy, security, appearance. So yeah, here in appearance in Chrome, you have a font size that starts out as medium. So it doesn't really give you like base values. You can't be like, you know, I'm going to set it as 32 pixels. You can make it large, and that's going to make everything larger, or like, you know, you might set it to chunky, or you might set it to small. But yeah, so if, for instance, so let me show it to you in this way. I set the font size of this paragraph element to 1 rem, right? If I make my browser's text large, it's also gonna get larger. If let's see what happens when I set it to 16 pixels, it's gonna stay small, even though everything is pretty large. But instead here, when I set it to 1 rem or 1M, you know, it's just gonna adapt size-wise to whatever screen size you set it to, which is great. Yeah, so I will go on a little bit more now. And I'm gonna talk to you all a little bit about colors, because that's also a good thing to have in mind. So far we've been using keywords like red or cyan to set colors in our large CSS file. So let's look at some other ways to do it. And I'm gonna use it again with the background. I'm going to do the background property here again, just to like show you guys. So let's just get rid of some colors. So I'm going to get rid of the color on the paragraph. I'm just going to carry this over to this new line here, where I'm just doing color values. So let's get ourselves a little bit more in order. Color values. So the first sort of color value that you can write down is, of course, keywords, like red. You have a whole lot of them. You, like, burly wood. I didn't know this was a thing. You can probably find lists of these like CSS keyword colors by just Googling CSS color keywords. Burly wood is just like making me sweat and palpitate right now, so I'm just gonna revert it to red. Oh boy. So other things, you might have seen hex codes. So writing red here again in hex codes is this. So like someone with 4 years of web experience now, can sort of read hex codes, so it's okay if you can't at all. I'm not going to go into like, you know, what it is right now here, but if you wanted to find a decent color picker for the web or for anything else where you can sort of understand how Xcodes work, or if you just want to, you know, pick some pretty colors and just add them into your website like this, you know, let's do, well, let's not meme and do minion yellow. Let's get Space Cadet, for instance. So you can just like paste that value, this number value you get over here, put a hashtag next to it, a hex rather, and you will get a new color. So when I save and refresh this, it's coolers.co. So let me just put it up like that as well. So now we have this Space Cadet color. Another way of setting backgrounds is, let me just close these. Let's save this guy and this guy, and let's do another background color. So let's do this one, for instance. This is another way of setting colors. This is also a sort of value type that we haven't seen before, like a keyword in parentheses. These are called CSS functions, which I want to get more into, but we are running out of time, so I'm just going to introduce them here. So in this case, Rgb, a CSS function, sets a color in the Rgb system. So here you can put in three things, like let's do red again. So 255.0.0 like this would give us a red, and our background is going to become red again. Let's now sort of like, you know, mess around with it a little bit more, just giving random, this is an ugly color. Well, a nice, a nice shitty brown. Another sort of CSS function way of setting colors is using Rgba. So if you just like go over this first number you're putting in is the red, the second one is the green, and the last one is the blue. Rgba similarly adds those three colors and then an alpha channel. So I can do something like this. Let's add a bit more pizzazz to it, make it greener, and then make it transparent, for instance, by adding a number here as the fourth thing, where, you know, you get a more transparent background like this. You also have the same for not just Rgb, like red, green, blue like this, but for hue, saturation, lightness systems. So doing that in different ways is going to give me other different colors. Yeah, there we go. So now that's a more different, well, that's not the color. That's interesting. Anyway, we'll figure out what's going on there in a little bit. So there are a lot of different ways to put up colors like this. Similarly, color pickers. Yeah, it's interesting that I was gonna talk about overwriting things in a bit, but it just did that in a way that I didn't expect. Maybe Rgb does override hue, saturation, lightness. No, but let's yeah, let's try to comment out some things. See if we get this lovely. Well, we don't. Okay, so it is HSL. Am I writing something? I mean, this did work yesterday. So once again, we are deeply surprised at the ways CSS can disappoint us. But I was going to talk about overrides. So as you might have seen so far before this HSL fiasco, every single line that we've written sort of overwrote the other. So that is one rule of CSS that we didn't talk about, like that whatever you write below is going to overwrite whatever you write above. There are other rules to this overwriting where, you know, IDs are going to take precedence over any other styles you write for the same element. If you do it through an ID, it's going to like overwrite that way. So I can also demonstrate that a little bit. We can maybe pull up, like, give this div over here both a class. Let's call the class my class, and an ID my ID, like this, and give it 3 different background colors in 3 different in 3 different selectors. So I wonder why this is, oh, CSS does do people dirty sometimes. Oh, it's this part over here. All right, cool. So we can give like, you know, background 3B3561 here. Let's grab some other colors like this nicer, I guess, cyan over here. Cadet blue, as it's called. Let's give it to my class. And let's also take this cute candy pink and give it to my ID. So by my guesses, it's gonna take up the pink that we just put in here, the candy pink. And that is not because it's just written last. If I put it up over here, it's still gonna, even though like these 2 other properties were supposed to overwrite this new background, they did not because I wrote it into an ID. So that sort of precedence goes, like the prioritization of these like styles go, like the ID styles are gonna apply first, and then class styles, and then generic element styles, like div over here. So I use Visual Studio Code. So, all right, that's like not everything that I want to talk to you about, but I hope this was helpful. If you all are, you know, interested in going on with a CSS education, I will definitely be hosting more of these workshops and hopefully getting better at them as time goes on. But I do really want to like take more generic questions for the last 15-ish minutes that we have, if anyone else has any more. I know this was just a like massive unloading of information, but you know. Oh, so let's see. If I had time, I'm just gonna go on from backwards. If I had time, what 3 other things would I tell you guys about? Well, I have a whole list of them here. Like I have 2 sheets of notes. I would have honestly like I definitely would have shown you guys CSS Grid. Just going through different variations of this workshop, I really didn't know what skill level to start from. For sure. So let me type those down. So sort of CSS study list, as I'll put it. So it was going to be properties and value types, which we did. Selectors, which are your IDs, divs, your parent selectors like this, like div p, etc. Then we would have gone to the sort of document flow, which in that case, we would like go into the inspector a little bit and look at sort of how elements, when we add different elements on top of each other, like do they stack up top of each other? Do they stack side by side? Just like how does the sort of element structure you build out in HTML, you know, stack up with each other? How does it look by default? I call that sort of the document flow. Afterwards, I would have gone into layouts. So all of these took 5 minutes or like 10 minutes, but I just got into tangents. So afterwards, so layouts, different ways of setting layouts. So we would be talking about what margins and paddings and borders and the box model, very important concept. We would be talking a little bit about that. And then what else? We would also be talking about the sort of the wrong and right way to do layouts. So we would be talking about why not to use floats, why not to use absolute positioning, and then we would be talking about flexbox and grid, and flexbox and grid, and maybe if we had time, like animations and transitions. I already cut out these like 2 pieces because I thought it would be too long, but you know, you never know with time. So Livia asked, how do you think about structuring class and ID names for a big site? So that is the big question, isn't it? And honestly, I haven't completely like settled into a style guide myself. Um, what I would suggest people with more CSS experience check out is this thing called Sass, which sort of helps the way I write CSS, which is the container and content model that I talked about a little bit here, that I just like showed you guys, where I give classes and IDs to the containers. So if I have a form, I give the form an ID, like subscription form, and then everything inside of it sort of becomes subscription form label, subscription form input, like this. And that's how I usually style it. But there are a lot of different ways to look at it. I also, I think it was supposed to be in this page. Yeah, I'm also gonna send you, I was also gonna send you guys this link over here, different CSS style guides. So these are style guides written by companies like GitHub and Google who use giant CSS files to, you know, just scale and manage their system. So their sort of rule sets, I would suggest, you know, if you're not working for Google or GitHub or like anything else, though, just like look at them, see what sort of patterns make sense to you, and etc. So on to the last question I have here. I'm gonna butcher your name. I'm so sorry. Hanyul, apologies again. It's not entirely about what's going on here on Zoom, but I am looking at your website. Oh, thank you. And I see dark gray noise background. Is it CSS and JavaScript? How did I make it? So let me pull up my website to show you what I'm talking about. So what we're talking about here is this sort of static background, which if you can see actually here, oh wow, I never noticed that I have this part broken. That's why you need people to look at your website and criticize it. But we're talking about this area here. So it is not noise. I'm gonna inspect and show you. It's sort of disappointing. It's a static, like it's a background image. Let's see, is it in body? Where did I put it to? Is it in, I think it's somewhere in main. Oh, there we are. So I have this like noise transparent um, image here that I use. But what I'm doing is I am moving that around with CSS. So first of all, the static, like the noise image itself is a 400 by 400 pixel thing. And I set it as a background image. I set it to repeat. I give it less of an opacity, and then I give it an animation. And the BG animation, which I wonder if we click on it, it shows you these different setups, but it doesn't show you what the animation actually is. But what I'm doing with the animation is I'm basically giving it the jitter. Like I'm making it move left and right and top and down sort of like sporadically, but not through noise or like a generated way. If you thought about adding a sort of generative noise, I would suggest using something like P5.js and using the canvas you create as this sort of like, you know, fixed background across your whole website. Are there any other questions I can answer? No problem. I will do a little dance. I wait for any other questions. I guess then I will give my sort of, what advice do I have about ID names? Make them make sense to you. Like, it's a sort of, it's completely up to you in the end, but like how to choose them and scale up as the project grows. Well, it's a good idea to think about, you know, what the ID is delineating. Like, you know, when you set an ID to an element, it's a good idea to think about what that element is. Is it a content card? Is it a profile image? Is it, you know, subscription background, some like a subscription form as we've used here. Some you will see some CSS styling guides where they will be like, you know, subscription form dash dash button dash dash button text, or you know, something like that, where you know they give all these really long ID names. I sort of see that as a recipe to get lost in the code. I I mean, the sort of key part of all of it is, and I really couldn't get to that part of like that principle a lot, but the best idea is to sort of use think about ID and class names in sort of uh, a modular way. So like you make them not as context dependent, so it shouldn't be like, you know, about page subscription form. If you have a subscription form element, if you write those styles, you know, in when you go to your HTML and add the ID subscription form to any container, you know, that's what I would that's what I recommend. Just like, you know, keep it contextual to what the element is doing, not the page is doing, or like other elements in relation to the element you're naming. How do I stay up on the latest news and developments in CSS? CSS Tricks is a wonderful website for that. And the thing is, honestly, CSS is a 25-year-old language. Not a lot of things, well, no, I'm lying. A lot of new things are getting added, but yeah, so CSS Tricks is a wonderful website. It is a bit too much in terms of visuals, if you ask me. Sometimes it does get a little bit messy. But they both have like very nice CSS deep cuts, you know, oh, how to make this crazy thing, or like, you know, how to make a parallax scrolling, or this and that using only CSS. This website is a complete like love letter to CSS. They also talk a lot about, you know, new functions. Another thing to see, to like check out, especially if you're researching a new feature, is this website, Can I Use? So caniuse.com. So you'll see some like most search features. This is not just a CSS website, but it's for all different web features. But so like you can click, oh, like I've heard of CSS Grid, but I want to like check out whether it's something I can use yet. So you can see here through this like, you know, sort of dark line here, which shows, oh, these are like the latest versions of all these browsers. You can see that like in modern browsers, you can use CSS Grid in everything except Opera Mini and Baidu Mini, for instance. So that's something I use a lot as well. It's not necessarily directly, you know, oh, this is a new update, but like you will see some mad features people use and you might not be sure if they're usable yet. You know, it's a good way to know like, oh, I can use this now or not. Current website trendy layouts. Well, I would rather not. The question is, can I tell you about current website trendy layouts? I really would rather not, because it's in the end, like all up to your taste. Um, the trendiest layout for me is a layout that works, and by works, I sort of like what I mean by works is, does it look good on all different screens? And by look good, I mean like, does it do its job? Um, does it provide a good solid experience? Are you actually absorbing the uh, content? Um, Whatever that works for you in the end is what you should be doing. To see, like, it used to be the boxy type and springboard menus. Well, yeah, I mean, there are some interesting websites where you can also track the web art history, or like the history of web aesthetics a bit as well. I personally find so it's sort of my own politics, because I sort of make websites um, uh, not like how to answer this properly. Like I sort of don't make websites as a like a I do them as a freelance job mainly. It's my main job, but also like the way I like thinking about websites is like not to see what's popular around these days. Like brutalism is very popular these days, which sort of ties into the minimal styling that is going on here. But you know, right now these days with like websites like, you know, Bloomberg and Balenciaga, even though it's sort of um, eh, so like they're also sort of appropriating this brutalist look that emerged in a much more underground and, you know, anti-corporate irreverent sort of way. Now that's being used again, so now people are looking into other ways of like looking at things. I cannot say this is better than the other one. It's all about the usability and well, not the usability, but like the sort of, does it spark joy to you? Does it spark joy to users? Is your content uh, accessible? So 4 or 5 websites that I like in terms of how they look. It is political living. Yeah, it, coming from a media, I come from a media studies and sort of like, you know, oh, media and aesthetics and ideology sort of thing. So I do get sort of rah, 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 about those sorts of things sometimes. Sorry if I got too harsh. Let me think of a few websites, gosh, that I really like. I can't think of any on the spot. And we have run out of time, but I would be very happy to be like stick around a little bit more to show, you know, while I think about websites that I really like, or answer more questions. Um, I Let me think, think. Websites that I like. I used to keep a running inspiration folder, then COVID happened and I stopped organizing myself in any way. Well, I can recommend a website that shows me websites that I really like, which is Hover States, which you might have seen already. This is a really nice inspiration source for me. A lot of things get added like almost on a weekly basis. Craigslist is the ultimate brutalist design, and like they did brutalism before anyone else did brutalism. So you know, raw HTML. So hover states is good. If you're interested in more like minimalist things, I guess, this is sort of like, this website is no longer being curated, I think, because it's been the same pages for months, but this is one. Another sort of, yeah, inspo website I love is not love, like is HTTP stir or Kupster. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't think it's meant to be pronounced. But a lot of nice inspo places, not just for web design, but for design in general. I definitely recommend checking out the Musli web extension. You can also see it here. And that is accessible to install for Chrome or Safari through this link. It sort of gives you a like weekly list of articles and like their little picks. They will showcase interesting portfolios, interesting agency websites with a lot of like different motion graphics and all of that happening. One big thing that I would love to talk about in some other workshop is definitely like just motion graphics using only CSS, because so like one way to do it is to leap directly into JavaScript to do those things and get lost in it. But like CSS is also like very conductive to creating these sort of, you know, cool moving layouts, like these little parallax effects, or the sort of like, you know, ooh, this text popping up and then whoop, fading out like that. Well, wow, I've been yapping for a solid hour and a half. Thank you so much for listening to me. If there aren't any other questions, I will let you go now. Thank you all so much. I hope this, even though we didn't get to like 20% of what I want to talk about, and I just, you know, just meandered on about CSS selectors for a while. Yeah, I hope you got something out of it in any other way. I don't really have like so y'all found my website already. That's somewhere you can find me. Another place you can find me for more learning is either my email. I do like responding to little webby questions from time to time, but also, of course, our newly opening University Learning Center. So if you're a Parsons or new school student in any way, you can book web or any other sort of coding classes with me, and you know, get more of this ranty, opinionated voice broadcasted directly into your ears 1 hour at a time. So thank you guys so much, and enjoy the next enjoy the next event that we have, which let me actually pull up and show you all, which is our last event of Telepresence, our conversation with Lauren Goshinsky about activism by design. So yeah, see you all there, I hope, and goodbye, and thank you again. Oh man.